We have a very interesting guest now, Steve Beauregard from the USA. So la charla estará en inglés, por favor, ¿no? Usa el sistema de traducción. Steve has been around in the crypto space for a long time. I think we met 4 years ago in Singapore. He's the founder of GoCoin and Block, also involved with Block. And we'll talk about worldwide adoption of cryptocurrencies. Steve, the stage is yours. Where are you? Yeah. A big hand for Steve Beauregard.
Great. All right.
Hey.
Thank you. Is this thing working okay? All right. Well, it's great to be back here in Latin America. And anybody have DirecTV dishes in Latin America? Anybody use the satellite dishes? You're welcome. So back in the 90s, I launched or helped launch DirecTV throughout the Latin American countries. So it's a bit of a homecoming for me. It's exciting. So if I look back at my career, I don't necessarily need the slides, but if they come up, that'll be great. If I look back at my career, I've really been sort of on the cutting edge of technology. And it's been fun to be there. In the early days, I helped launch DirecTV, like I said, satellite television. Then the internet started getting really big. I started a company in the internet space. We pretty quickly recognized that email and messaging systems would become very important. And so we started a mail messaging practice. Beyond that, we started getting into mobile. And I'm going to skip forward to the slide that kind of shows the progression. So I got into mobile, became a BlackBerry partner in the early days. A lot of pain, taking a lot of arrows, getting these technologies up and going. Social became big. E-commerce, started building e-commerce apps. And then the way I got into blockchain was around 2011. My wife, actually, we were building a website for her, and it was sort of a kid-facing social media type site. And she said, I want to use Bitcoin, this thing I've been researching, as a way to incentivize people to sign somebody up. So I'm thinking maybe we'll give 5 Bitcoin to somebody who signs another person up. And then if you make a comment, we'll give them 1 Bitcoin. So she had this whole method for it. So what I did was I called the only virtual currency expert I know in LA, fellow entrepreneur Brock Pierce, and we talked for about 45 minutes. He says, I like the idea, but I think you're just too early. I don't think the market's ready. Bitcoin isn't that popular yet. I've been exploring it for a while, but now you fast forward 2 years later, and I'm still building big enterprise systems, e-commerce systems for Oakley, for Sony Pictures, etc. And Lee comes to me again and says, I want to just take Bitcoin as a form of payment on my website. So I assigned one of my engineers to go look at it. He stays up all night long, wakes up, he comes into the office the next day, he's got red eyes. He's like, we need to stop everything we're doing and just do Bitcoin. Nothing else matters. And I'm like, why? We're going to shut down our projects with Sony and Oakley sunglasses and stop these projects just because of this technology? And once he explained to me that this was sort of the holy grail of transferring value around the internet, I had that aha moment. So that's how I initially got into Bitcoin. So I love to start with this slide. So I used to work for Digital Equipment Corporation, and Ken Olsen made a very famous blunder. He said, there's no reason anyone would ever need a personal computer in their house. And is he right? Of course he was wrong. One of the reasons Digital Equipment Corporation is no longer around. Steve Ballmer, Google's not a real company, it's a house of cards. Right? Also why Steve is no longer the CEO of Microsoft. One of my personal favorites is from the founder of Blockbuster. I'm not sure if Blockbuster was a big deal down here, but Netflix is not even on our radar in terms of competition. So what's common between all these? I'm going to get to the last one in a second because I know everyone loves to talk about Jamie Dimon. What's common is they're trying to protect their market. They don't have a product to sell. DEC didn't have a personal computer that was worth anything. So the PC was left space for the PC. So if you look at the history of these technologies, really they build on top of each other. So if you look at the companies that are now being successful that are worth a lot, they're all in the software business. It's no longer about General Electric. It's no longer about ExxonMobil or Citibank. You're now seeing the Apples, Microsofts, Amazons, Facebooks. These are the companies that have really, really big values now. So why is that? And I think it's largely because software is really becoming the new value driver. It's no longer about just having assets or just how much oil you can produce, et cetera, et cetera. The software is really starting to be a game changer here. So as I look at blockchain and blockchain technology, I just want to give a foundation of sort of the elements that we're going to see through the invention of blockchain that start to really drive value. Everything from the payment space to digital IDs, smart contracts, timestamping. These are all things that blockchains do extraordinarily well. Okay, at Block, we're really focused on enterprise solutions. So we're looking at putting big blockchain systems into the largest corporations in the world, right? And as we get into these discussions, we start to see a pattern develop of building the early proof of concepts, cross-border payments, timestamping, things that have immediate value. The innovation is really going to happen in the next, let's call it, 3 to 5 years, when you start to see companies actually start to build things on top of blockchains. And ultimately, what we're going to see is a big transformation take place, where we're transforming ideas, similar to the way that Uber has transformed or Lyft has transformed those markets, where taxi drivers are now going to be disintermediated. They no longer have that centralized control. So you look at the big corporations that have jumped into the space, and they jumped in a big way. You're talking about the early 2013, 14, just a couple sprinkling of companies. Now you have Visa, Discover, MasterCard, American Express, all of them doing work in the space. And you have to say, well, why? What's really the value driver? And as you start talking about the value drivers, you start to hear all the bad news out there. So a lot of the market hears about Mt. Gox being hacked, $250 million disappeared overnight, right? Bitfinex lost a huge chunk. Cripsy, all of these guys were hacked. And those news stories really scare people. And it really impedes the adoption. Then you have some scammers, flat out people doing everything from Ponzi schemes to Paycoin, who may have been well-intended, but they said they're going to promise a floor, their coin will never go below. They could never support it. So then you have the scammers. One of my favorite scams, I love to tell the story, is when I was running GoCoin and we're taking payments. And one of these websites comes up, and it was a conference like this, but in an Eastern Bloc country. And they started doing transactions on the network. And my compliance guy calls me up and says, hey, you need to look at this conference. Are you really speaking at this conference? And they had me listed as a speaker, and I'd never even heard of the conference, never been invited, and they were only taking Bitcoin as a form of payment. And I'm like, aha, I think I'm on to something here. So you have to watch the scams, because there was never a conference that never existed. They just put up a pretty website and started collecting coins, right? So what that ends with is you have the angry mobs. Everyone's mad. They got the pitchforks out because they want to know, where's my money? And these news stories really they're really stopping adoption, right? Because they're real. And it's scary because you don't know who to trust. Anybody a Simpsons fan? Okay, this is a really interesting episode. I'm going to draw a parallel between the sushi chef here. So is anyone familiar with blowfish? Blowfish is a delicacy in Japan, and it has a gland inside that if the chef cuts into that gland, it poisons the fish, and the person eating it dies. So it's a good analogy to Bitcoin, because as you talk to newbies going into the space, they start to say, oh, I'm just scared. I don't want to lose my private key. I don't know how to protect it. And so they start to draw these analogies. So you look at the menu, and they tell you all these warnings, all these bad things could happen. But Homer believes that he's going to get a professional sushi chef, and they're going to get a great, tasty meal. So that's his impression. But in reality, you never know if this guy is going to be the one preparing the blowfish. So if he cuts into the wrong gland, that's what happens to Homer. So we don't want this in our industry. So we're starting to see a lot of innovations take place that are starting to take a lot of the risk away and move into solutions that we don't have to worry about managing our private keys every day, because you have companies like BitGo, where you still have a wallet that's not sitting on an exchange. You still ultimately have control, but if you lose it, they give you a path to restore. So you look at other technologies like credit cards, or financial instruments rather. And it took 30 years for credit cards to be widely adopted. And who knows what the big driver of that was? It's on the screen. It was really the loyalty systems. point systems. You use this credit card, you get frequent flyer miles. You can buy these things with frequent flyer miles. You get free flights. That was a big value driver why people chose credit cards. So I'll tell you in a minute where I think this needs to go for Bitcoin, or I use Bitcoin collectively as all cryptocurrencies, just to be clear. I don't think it's going to be just one coin wins all. So I pulled this slide from 2014 when I was running GoCoin. And we would go to a merchant, and this was our pitch to them. We'd say, you know, credit cards have all this pain and friction, which gives an opportunity to use these cryptocurrencies. 3 to 4% transaction fees plus 30 cents per transaction. You know, you've got, prepaid cards are 20%. You've got all these chargeback problems and fraud that happens with credit cards. And then we'd say the real costs are really this big. And that was true for quite a while. And we would charge 1%, so on a $100 transaction, GoCoin would charge $1, and the credit card companies would charge 3 or 4. Well, now that the mining fees have gotten really out of hand, this is what's happened in the Bitcoin business. Okay, credit card transactions for $20. Let's talk about what it looks like. So you're still with a credit card with your 30-cent transaction fee and 60 cents, the 3%, you're still paying sub $1 for a credit card transaction on $20. Now let's go over to see what it looks like with Bitcoin. It used to be a couple of pennies, right? But now with these mining fees completely out of hand, this is what we have. We've got the 1%, 20-cent processing fee, and then about $4 average mining fee on a $20 transaction. So as far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin as a method of payment for low-dollar transactions has failed. And maybe that was the point all along. And maybe the point was that it will grow. I mean, I heard Nick Szabo speak earlier, and he said now we're into the second layer. But I think that's sort of an adaptation of what we need to do now, not that was really ever the plan. But it really doesn't matter because we have all these altcoins now. So one of the things, when we started GoCoin, we did differently is we said, I don't think it's just going to be one winner takes all. It won't just be about Bitcoin. It's going to be about other coins as well. There's coins that will do things very well, like smaller transaction fees, high volume, high transactions, and Bitcoin doesn't have to do everything, which has led us into the ICOs. And I think the ICOs are fascinating because for the first time, in the early days, if you were to fork Bitcoin and create Litecoin or Dash or any of these other coins that have heritage back to Bitcoin, you had to convince all of these miners to mine that coin, which is really difficult. And so lots of times, these coins would just fall flat. And we've seen a lot of examples of coins that didn't make it. But with Ethereum now, you can put a coin out on top of the Ethereum chain and not have to worry about convincing miners because you can rely on the power of the Ethereum mining. So the way to think about a lot of these new ICOs is it really doesn't cost much to create a token. It's probably, on the cheap, you can do it for about $5,000. The more expensive ones I'm seeing are anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, depending on how much they put into marketing and trying to really convince people to adopt their coin. So the way I look at these coins is if you can't figure out what the demand creation, what really drives the demand creation. You look at the early days of Bitcoin. Why did it become so popular? Because they had the Silk Road site. If you're not familiar with Silk Road, that was an underground website where you could go buy drugs. And people wanted that product. So Bitcoin was the most efficient, cheapest way to get it. So they'd go buy Bitcoin, they'd go to the Silk Road site, place their order, buy more Bitcoin, place more orders, buy more Bitcoin. So if you look at that cycle of use, that's the way to think about why it would be successful. Now, of course, Bitcoin's grown out of that now, and we're seeing a lot of other uses for it. And but if you look at those early lessons, when I look at the ICOs, I really want to understand the team behind it, make sure that they're really reputable people, that they're well-known, that they have a track record, that they're putting their name behind something. And the other thing to keep in mind is, are the people that are listed on the site actually endorsing it? Because a lot of scammers will represent that certain people are behind their project when they're actually not. So you have to look into that as well. Now for the coin itself, you got to look for that cycle of use. One coin in particular that's done a token sale recently that I love is called Wax. And the reason I love Wax so much is because they have a proven market. Are you familiar with the games where you have swords and armor and different things? And what skin, they have a company called OpSkins. And OpSkins is probably the largest Bitcoin merchant in the world because kids want these swords. They want the armor. They want the cool helmet that their friend doesn't have. And they're going to spend anywhere from 30 cents to $300 to get that. And they want it. So Wax said, we're tired of paying these $4, $5 transaction fees for our $20 transactions on Bitcoin. So they've created their own token. And now they're going to make that, just like you go to an arcade, you put your money in, you get coins. Now you can play the games. It's the same idea. They'll make that the currency within their network for the digital exchange. So you just look for that cycle of use. If you can't answer the question, is there another currency that can do what they say they are going to do? Or do they have a captive market? Then that's really what's going to drive value. And then the other thing you really want to look at is the marketing of the ICO and look at the credibility, what's being said about it, because we're now in a time of transparency and crowdsourcing of information. So it wouldn't be complete if I didn't do a little ad here for Block. So those of you who are familiar with Jeff Garzik, he's the founder of Block. And Jeff was one of the developers in the early days that worked with Satoshi and contributed to the project. Also, you may know that he's been at the center of the controversy around 2x or SegWit 2x. So he was really driving to increase the capacity so that Bitcoin could be better used for payments. And so Jeff really got frustrated by this. And so in response, what we've done is Block is going to actually release a cryptocurrency. And it's going to be basically addressing a lot of the public discord that's happened with Bitcoin. So the idea is we're going to launch a token called Metronome that once it's released, the governance is completely done. It's set in the contracts that can never be changed. Also, Metronome is going to be designed so you can you'll put your Ethereum into the smart contract, and between the 4 smart contracts, it's going to basically manage the money supply, and the money supply will be fixed from now till the end of time. So it's not a matter of, at this date it's going to run out, we're not sure what's going to happen. With Metronome, there's initial crowd sale that happens that will be 8 million tokens sold in a descending price auction. Not a Dutch auction, but basically fair. Fair for everybody, gets released on day 1 as a token that is available to everybody, whether you're a large institutional investor or the small guy that only has a fraction of an Ethereum. All you do is send it into the smart contract when the price hits a certain point, because that's where you want to buy. So it should actually have price discovery based on when people start to come in and start to buy. So that initial supply, once that's over, you'll see a token supply, excuse me, of 2,880 tokens per day that get released into a auction, and the same thing happens. The price gets back to the original, and it starts dropping down every minute to 99% of the previous price. So this is really partially in response to if you were to create a cryptocurrency today based on what you know and what you've seen in the cryptocurrency markets. Anyway, in addition to the launching Metronome, Block is also providing enterprise class solutions to the largest corporations. Think of like Red Hat with Linux. So we're putting blockchain systems into the largest corporations, and it's all open source and available to benefit from all of the public development efforts that come into Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of the various chains. So you see some of our advisors here, and happy to be with the team as of January. So jumping back to 2014, everybody remembers the Newsweek story, and I've seen Dorian around the conference a little bit. And Newsweek, put the story out that Dorian had been found in plain sight. His name, Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, and Newsweek reports this is him. But Dorian says, it ain't me. And he's right, it's not him. Because I met him back in Los Angeles at a conference recently and talked to Dorian, really, really awesome guy, very interesting, but no, it's not Satoshi. So I think I've actually figured out who Satoshi is. It's this guy. Thank you very much.
Steve, will you take some questions?
Oh,
two
sure,
questions,
happy
maybe?
to.
Yeah? Any question for Steve? Yeah, there's a question here. Do you have a mic? You get a mic.
Why do you say Neo is a scam?
I'm sorry?
Why do you say Neo is a scam?
Neo, the one from Greece? Neo is, maybe you have confused. This is Neo from 2013-14 out of Greece, who had a sham corporation. So,
Okay.
Neo and yes, Neo and B. That's the other one. That's what they are. There's a different. It's not to be confused with the Neo coin. I apologize.
Okay.
Thanks, Brock.
One more question?
There's so many ICOs out there right now.
Yes.
Dozens and dozens, literally. And you talked about, for example, Wax, which is doing a ICO at the moment for their OP skin.
Yep.
And, you know, they're coming in. They have what you can see as a very big marketing strategy, and they're putting a lot of money behind it. But, for example, Skincoin launched 6 months ago already, and already has an exchange up and running and is doing it. And there's many different cryptos for skins, for example, if we're talking about this particular segment. And you talked about how to identify which ones are solid ICOs and which ones are sort of flaky ICOs in many ways. And a lot of people here, for example, are going to be investing in ICOs as neophytes in many ways. Maybe you could go into a little more depth on what it takes to really identify strong ICOs beyond just who's on the team and their backgrounds and so forth. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so I'll just take the Opskins example. What I like about it is they're already doing about $20 million a month in Bitcoin transactions on their platform. So they have a going concern that is already in the market. They're arguably the category killer for skins. So now they're going to take their coin and apply that to their current flow of business and basically start to dwindle down how much they use Bitcoin for smaller transactions. It's just not economical any longer to use Bitcoin for that. So that's why there's the other ones I've looked at, but they don't have the market share that Opskins does, and that's why I like it. I also like the team because they're long-term gamers. They know virtual currencies. They've been in the market. They've executed on business plans, before. And I'm not giving any advice on you should jump in and buy it. I'm just telling you the reasoning behind it is they have a real legitimate business where a lot of people have two guys, a dog, and a white paper, and they launch a coin. They don't have any industry expertise. So if you don't see that they have the proper industry expertise, they're not entrenched in that business, they're most likely going to fail. They might pull a rabbit out of a hat, or they might have a miracle where they suddenly gain traction or get some meaningful contracts. But if there's just an idea without sort of the meat behind it, that's what I'm really looking for.